Sometimes you hear a story that just, well, it stops you in your tracks. A transformation so radical it feels almost unbelievable. That's exactly what we're diving into today with Singapore. Just imagine this tiny island, practically a speck on the map,
Right.
facing widespread poverty, no natural resources to speak of, and then picture that same place now, a global powerhouse.
It's stunning.
Where an astonishing 1 in 6 people are millionaires.
It's a truly remarkable ascent, and to really grasp the scale, you have to think about the starting point. This densely populated, resource-scarce place.
Yeah.
The sheer, will and strategic brilliance needed for that kind of turnaround.
Yeah.
That's what makes Singapore's story so compelling.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've got a fascinating resource. It's the transcript of a YouTube video by Nitish Rajput called How Singapore Got Crazy Rich.
Okay.
And our mission really is to unpack the core elements that fuel this incredible rise.
Yeah.
We're not just interested in the what of Singapore's success, but really digging deep into the how.
Right. We'll trace the key stages, from its early history as this strategically vital trading post, right through to the decisive leadership that, ultimately forged its destiny. It's a narrative packed with unexpected twists and some profound insights.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Geographically, where exactly is Singapore?
Okay, picture the very, very southern tip of the Malay Peninsula.
Right.
Singapore sits just off it. It's an island nation bordered by sea, with Malaysia just to the north, and Indonesia forming a big part of its other sea boundaries. And when we say tiny, it's almost hard to really picture it. Just 719 square kilometers.
Wow.
To give you a sense of scale, that's over 4,500 times smaller than India.
That really puts it in perspective. A real minnow, landmass-wise. Yet it seems this location, despite the size, it turned out to be a massive strategic advantage, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely crucial. Think about the sea routes, the Straits of Malacca and the Sunda Strait.
Right, the famous straits.
Yeah, they're like natural bottlenecks, these narrow sea lanes connecting the huge Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. As far back as the 7th century, these straits were the essential arteries for east-west trade. If you wanted to move goods between, say, the Middle East, India, Europe, and East Asia,
you had to go through there.
You almost certainly had to navigate through one of them. Yeah.
And I remember reading that even between those two key straits, one was usually preferred for trade. Why the Strait of Malacca?
Well, yeah, the Strait of Malacca, it's actually narrower and shallower than the Sunda Strait.
Oh, okay.
But historically, it offered a more direct path for a lot of the key trading patterns. So it was just the more frequently chosen route, even with its, navigational challenges.
Fascinating. So even before modern ports, how did the local rulers kind of capitalize on all this ship traffic going by?
Well, back in the 7th century, you had powerful kingdoms like Palembang and Srivijaya.
Right.
They totally recognized the strategic value of controlling these waterways. They basically acted as toll collectors, levying taxes on ships passing through their territory. And that generated, substantial wealth and influence for them.
So the economic potential was there really early on, just because of where it was. Now, there's also that famous origin story for Singapore's name, the lion legend.
Ah, yes, Prince Sangnila Utama. The story goes, 14th century, he visits the island, which was then called Temasek.
Temasek. Right.
And there, he supposedly saw this animal he'd never encountered before. Someone told him it looked like a lion, Singa in Sanskrit.
Singa.
Yeah. He was impressed, renamed the island Singapura Lion City.
Lion City.
And even today, the Merlion, that mythical creature, lion's head, fish body.
Oh, you see pictures everywhere.
It's still a powerful national symbol for Singapore.
It's incredible how these early geographic facts and even like a foundational myth helped shape the identity. Okay, let's fast forward a few centuries. We start seeing more interest from foreign powers. What was going on then?
Well, as these trade routes just kept getting more important, various European powers saw the huge potential in controlling this strategic spot.
Right.
The Portuguese were among the first to really get a foothold. They seized control of the Strait of Malacca between 1509 and 1511.
Okay.
They understood how critical seaports were for long voyages, places for ships to resupply, get repairs, and for local commerce to kind of grow up around them.
And then the Dutch show up, and they weren't exactly happy about the Portuguese having a monopoly there, were they?
Precisely. By 1603, the Dutch East India Company had basically driven out the Portuguese. It took a long period of pretty intense conflict, actually.
Right.
And after that, the Dutch held considerable influence over the Strait of Malacca for quite a long time.
So Portuguese, then the Dutch. jockeying for position. Where do the British fit into this already crowded competitive picture?
Well, the British East India Company, they were obviously heavily invested in India.
Right.
But they also had big trading interests in Southeast Asia and knew how important these sea passages were. But they weren't really looking for a direct fight with the Dutch, who were pretty well dug in at Malacca.
Okay, so what do they do?
So in January 1819, they sent Thomas Stamford Raffles to the area just east of the Strait of Malacca.
Ah, strategic positioning.
Exactly. That area was under the authority of the Sultan of Johor at the time.
And Raffles somehow managed to secure Singapore for the British. How did that happen?
Well, through some pretty skillful diplomacy, apparently, and agreeing to pay 8,000 Spanish dollars.
Money talks.
He persuaded the Sultan of Johor to sign a treaty in February 1819, granting the British control over Singapore Island. But it's important, the Dutch still controlled the Strait of Malacca itself.
So the British strategy wasn't really about challenging the Dutch head-on.
No.
More about setting up a secure, advantageous spot for their trade without sparking a major conflict. Clever move, really.
A very clever strategic maneuver.
Yeah. Now, this must have created some interesting competition, right? This sort of unspoken rivalry between the Dutch in Malacca and the British in Singapore.
Oh, absolutely. There was definitely this clear, maybe subtle competition. Each side wanted the passing ships to stop at their port.
And the British came up with a pretty bold, maybe even ingenious strategy to get an edge, making Singapore a free port.
Yes, this was a masterstroke. The British East India Company decided to declare Singapore a free port. Meaning no taxes, no duties imposed on ships of any country using its harbor for trade.
Wow.
And this wasn't just about zero taxes, It signaled this radical openness, a commitment to global commerce that kind of got embedded in Singapore's DNA.
Right.
It fostered this culture of internationalism, positioned Singapore as neutral ground for business that had lasting benefits way beyond just the immediate trade volume.
So the idea was undercut the Dutch.
Exactly. Undercut the Dutch, stimulate overall trade, and they figured they'd make long-term profits from just the sheer volume of activity, even without directly taxing the port itself.
It was a calculated risk, but sounds like it paid off big time.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't just the lack of taxes, was it? The harbor itself had natural advantages.
Absolutely. Singapore's coastline had this more favorable natural slope compared to some other ports nearby, which just made it easier and safer for ships, especially the bigger ones with deeper drafts, to dock and do their business. So naturally, it became a preferred choice for many captains.
And all this shipping, all this trade, it inevitably led to another huge change, a massive population boom.
Exactly right. The economic opportunities created by this bustling free port just pulled in a huge wave of immigrants, people from China, India, the Malay Peninsula, all flocking to what had been a pretty sparsely populated island before, looking for work, the promise of a better life.
But with this super rapid growth,
Yeah.
and the British mostly focused on trade in the port, sounds like some serious social problems started bubbling up.
Unfortunately, yes. The British administration was, largely focused on port security and maximizing profit. They paid comparatively little attention to social administration, welfare, that kind of thing. And this created a bit of a lawless environment.
Like what?
Well, illegal activities like the opium trade, gambling, slave trading, commercial sex work, violent crime, they all became widespread. Singapore sadly got this reputation as a bit of a den of vice.
So the port's booming, but society wasn't exactly peaceful and orderly. And despite all this activity, the British weren't initially making the kind of money they expected.
That's correct, yeah. While Singapore was rapidly becoming this major port, the profits for the British East India Company weren't as huge as they'd maybe hoped, especially when you compare it to the immense wealth the UK was getting from China at the time.
Right.
Mostly because of China's rich natural resources and that established trade relationship.
Which brings us to a pretty dark chapter, the opium trade. The British played a really significant role in its expansion, didn't they?
They did. It was largely about addressing this big trade imbalance with China. Well, the British were buying tons of Chinese goods like tea and silk, but China didn't really want much British stuff in return.
Okay.
So to fix that, the British East India Company started aggressively promoting opium cultivation in India and then selling it in China, basically creating a dependency to fuel their trade.
And tragically, this devastating problem spread to Singapore, too.
Tragically, yes. As the Chinese labor population in Singapore swelled, so did the problem of opium addiction. By 1847, get this, Singapore's population was maybe 70,000. Around 40,000 were Chinese. And it's estimated that about 15,000 people were addicted to opium.
15,000 out of 70,000. That's staggering. That's over 20%.
It really illustrates the scale of the crisis. Yeah.
What were the wider social effects of addiction on that scale?
Oh, the consequences were just devastating. Opium use became incredibly common, sometimes even used instead of money in transactions, believe it or not. It fueled widespread poverty as people spent whatever little they earned on the drug. And it led to a huge increase in theft and other crimes as addicts got desperate to fund their habit.
It paints a really bleak picture of Singapore back then. But then another major global event happened that shifted Singapore's strategic importance yet again: the Suez Canal.
Exactly. The Suez Canal officially opened in November 1869.
Right.
And this created a much, much shorter and more efficient sea route between Europe and Asia, especially connecting England and China.
Oh, okay.
So this dramatically increased the amount of ship traffic passing through the Strait of Malacca. And naturally, that had a huge positive impact on Singapore's port activity.
More ships must have meant more demand for everything: labor, port facilities, infrastructure.
Precisely. The surge in maritime traffic led to a corresponding surge in demand for labor to service the ships, handle the goods, support the trade. This, in turn, forced the development of much better infrastructure throughout Singapore. And crucially, the rapidly growing population and all this economic activity finally made the British shift their focus.
How so?
They just couldn't afford to ignore the broader needs of governance anymore.
So the Suez Canal, in a way, indirectly pushed for better administration in Singapore.
You could say that, yeah. The huge increase in economic activity, the growing, more settled population, it forced the British to set up more comprehensive rules and regulations, create a formal police force, invest in necessary infrastructure.
Right.
Singapore really started transforming into a more established, properly run British colony.
It sounds like things were maybe finally starting to look up a bit, but then the 20th century hits, bringing a whole new set of global crises. World War I first.
Yes, World War I, starting 1914, it had a big negative impact on global trade patterns.
Right, disrupted everything.
Yeah, which, as you can imagine, severely hit Singapore's role as this major international trading hub. Unemployment shot up, and shortages of basic food became a serious problem for people.
And that wasn't the only blow around that time. The Spanish flu pandemic also hit Singapore hard.
Tragically, yes.
Yeah.
In 1918, the Spanish flu swept across the world, and Singapore, being so densely populated and globally connected.
Yeah, recipes for disaster.
It wasn't spared. Thousands of people died from it there.
And as if that wasn't enough, just over a decade later, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression of 1929 brought yet more significant economic hardship, just piling onto the difficulties they'd already faced after the war and the pandemic.
And then, arguably the most devastating event in Singapore's history, World War II and the Japanese occupation.
This was an incredibly dark, traumatic period. February 8th, 1942, Imperial Japan launched its invasion. The British forces, who everyone thought had built this impregnable fortress.
Yeah, Fortress Singapore.
Right. They suffered a swift, humiliating defeat in just 7 days.
Wow.
And the Japanese occupation that followed was just marked by extreme brutality. Mass killings, widespread forced labor, torture, unimaginable suffering for the civilian population.
It's almost impossible to really grasp the level of devastation then. The idea of Singapore becoming prosperous must have seemed completely impossible.
Utterly beyond the realm of possibility, yeah.
And the occupation only ended when the war itself ended.
Yes. With the U.S. atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan finally surrendered. The British forces returned to Singapore later that same month.
So the British are back, but the world had changed massively. What was the immediate situation in Singapore right after the war?
Singapore was in a truly dire state. Severe food shortages were everywhere. The economy was just in ruins. And more than that, the whole experience of the Japanese occupation had completely shattered the local population's view of British invincibility.
Right.
And it massively fueled this growing desire for self-determination, for independence, really, across the whole region.
And the British seemed to recognize this shift, didn't they? Leading to some big political changes.
They did. Recognizing these growing, louder calls for more autonomy, the British started to gradually grant Singapore more internal control.
Like what?
Things like allowing local elections, the formation of a local government with elected officials, increasing control over domestic policies.
But not everything.
No, key areas like international relations and defense, those stayed firmly under British control.
Okay, this brings us to a really pivotal moment. The first general election in 1959 and the rise of Lee Kuan Yew.
Exactly. The 1959 general election, the People's Action Party, the PAP.
The PPP, right.
The party led by Lee Kuan Yew, they won a landslide victory. 43 out of 51 seats in this new legislative assembly.
Wow, decisive.
Absolutely. And this huge win propelled Lee Kuan Yew to become the Prime Minister of Singapore, a truly transformative figure in the nation's story. He is without doubt the person everyone calls the founding father of the nation, isn't he? And it really seems his particular style of leadership was just crucial for everything that came next.
Absolutely.
It's a style many have tried to copy, but as our source material notes, usually without much success.
His vision, his unwavering commitment, his very pragmatic approach, they were pretty unique. But it's crucial to remember the huge, multifaceted challenges he faced right from day one.
Absolutely. What were some of the most urgent problems facing this new self-governing Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew?
Well, the situation was incredibly precarious. There was this very real fear of being completely abandoned by the British, leaving Singapore totally vulnerable economically and security-wise. Then there was the rising tide of communism in Southeast Asia.
Right, the Cold War context.
Backed by the Soviet Union and China, posing a major threat both internally and externally. And then you had the deep-seated domestic issues, just widespread poverty, huge slums.
Yeah, chronic hunger, that ingrained opium addiction problem, really high crime rates, simmering racial tensions between the different ethnic groups, massive unemployment, and just a complete lack of any national unity. People saw themselves as Chinese, Malay, Indian, not really as Singaporean yet.
So a truly overwhelming list of problems. Where did he even start tackling such a complex mess?
His very first priority was crystal clear: forging a strong sense of national unity among this incredibly diverse population.
Okay.
He deeply understood that without that foundation, that shared national identity cutting across ethnic and religious lines,
Right.
any other policies, no matter how good, would just struggle to stick and have lasting success.
And a big part of actively building that unity involved creating national symbols, didn't it?
Precisely. The careful creation of the national flag, the national anthem, these were early, really important steps. It's interesting the transcript mentions how short the anthem is.
Yeah, fits on the money.
Yeah, even fits on their currency. These seemingly small details were actually highly symbolic, designed to be easily embraced, easily remembered by everyone.
Yeah, one of the most critical issues was housing. The transcript says an astonishing 70% of people lived in slums. How did they tackle that massive crisis?
This was just a monumental task. In February 1960, the government set up a dedicated agency, the Housing and Development Board, the HDB.
The HDB, okay.
Its core mission was to acquire land and just undertake massive construction of public housing units. And these weren't just basic shelters, they were designed to be affordable for slum dwellers, offered through both sales and long-term leases.
And they even used the Central Provident Fund, the CPF, in a new way to help people afford them.
Yes, this was a really key innovation. The CPF was already there, this mandatory savings scheme, but it was traditionally just for retirement.
Right.
Lee Kuan Yew's government radically expanded its use, letting people pull funds from their CPF accounts to buy HDB flats, even cover major medical bills. This basic change just made homeownership a realistic dream for the vast majority of the population.
But it wasn't just about putting roofs over heads, was it? There was a very deliberate social engineering aspect to how they allocated these flats, too.
Absolutely. The government implemented this policy of purposefully allocating flats within HDB blocks to create a mix of different ethnic groups in the same buildings, the same neighborhoods.
Really mixing people up.
Yeah, it was a very calculated, quite bold social strategy. The goal was to force daily interaction between different communities, break down those old patterns of segregation, Chinese downtown, Malays in Kampong Glam, Indians in Serangoon, and really promote genuine national unity right down at the neighborhood level.
That's a fascinating, very proactive way to build integration.
Yeah.
What about religious harmony? Singapore is, and always was, incredibly multi-religious.
Yeah, recognizing how easily deep divisions could arise from religious and racial discrimination, the government made promoting religious harmony an absolute top priority. The core principle was simple. complete equality and mutual respect for all religions and practices. And as the transcript notes, they knew that for this to really work long term, it had to start young, in the schools.
So what specific things did they do in the education system?
Well, they strategically poured resources into upgrading government schools, made them have far better infrastructure, materials, facilities than the existing community-based schools.
Which were often ethnic or religious-based.
Exactly. And crucially, this high-quality government education was offered really cheaply.
Oh, okay.
So naturally, parents from all communities started choosing government schools more and more.
Right.
And the curriculum itself was carefully designed to really stress mutual respect, understanding, national unity. They even deliberately encouraged cross-cultural stuff in school events, like Chinese kids participating in Malay traditional dress performances.
Fostering shared experiences.
Exactly. Teachers were also specifically trained and told how to actively promote these unity values in the classroom.
Beyond schools, it sounds like they used culture itself as a tool for unity.
Exactly. The Ministry of Culture was set up specifically to unite people through multicultural events held in multiple languages. They actively encouraged participation across ethnic lines, so you'd see different communities joining in and celebrating each other's traditions and festivals.
And to really underline this multilingual reality, they made all the main languages official.
Yes, fully recognizing the diversity. Chinese, Malay, Tamil, English speakers, all four were declared official languages. A symbolic act showing commitment to inclusivity, the equal value of all communities.
So real progress on unity.
Yeah.
But as you said earlier, the economy was still incredibly fragile, dependent on the port, rubber trade linked to Malaysia, no natural resources. What was the economic strategy?
Yeah, the economic situation was exceptionally precarious. Heavy reliance on the port, rubber processing, much of it tied to Malaysia.
Right.
The total lack of natural resources was this fundamental constant challenge. And with the uncertainty about the British military staying, security was a huge worry too.
It sounds like Lee Kuan Yew initially looked at closer ties with Malaysia, maybe even merging, as a potential fix.
He did. Initially, there were real efforts to build closer ties, politically and economically. Even symbolic things, like declaring Malay the national language, emphasizing Singapore's supposed Malay origins.
Right.
Lee Kuan Yew genuinely believed merging with the bigger Federation of Malaysia offered big advantages, security guarantees, access to a larger market, more economic opportunities for Singaporeans.
And this eventually led to the merger referendum in 1961, which the people supported.
Yes, the vast majority who voted were in favor of joining the Federation of Malaysia.
So September 16th, 1963, Singapore officially becomes a state within Malaysia. What were the key terms of that deal?
Well, the deal was Singapore becomes a state within Malaysia. Singapore had to give 40% of its annual revenue to the central Malaysian government.
Okay, quite a bit.
Yeah. But Singapore kept some autonomy control over education, labor. Malaysia handled defense, foreign affairs, internal security. And Singapore got 15 seats in the Malaysian parliament.
Sounds like a complex arrangement.
Oh.
But we know it didn't last. It failed pretty quickly. Why? What went wrong?
Several things kind of came together. The PRP deciding to run in the Malaysian general elections in March 64, that made the ruling Malaysian government very nervous.
Worried about the competition.
Yeah, they saw the PRP's growing influence as a potential threat to their own power. Then, in July and the next month of 64, serious race riots broke out in Singapore.
Oh, no.
Violent clashes between Malay and Chinese communities. People were killed, many injured.
Those riots must have been a terrifying reminder of the underlying ethnic tensions.
They really were. And after the riots, the Malaysian government started pressuring Lee Kuan Yew to bring in policies that favored the Malay population in Singapore.
It's a political game.
Basically, yeah. But Lee Kuan Yew absolutely refused. He stuck firmly to his core belief in equality for everyone, regardless of ethnicity.
Right.
And this fundamental disagreement on principles, it just became an unbridgeable gap.
And the shocking outcome was Singapore getting kicked out of Malaysia, unexpectedly.
Yes, August 9th, 1965. The Malaysian Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, decided the only way forward was to separate Singapore from Malaysia.
Wow.
So Singapore became an independent republic, completely against its initial wishes. Lee Kuan Yew's very emotional reaction during the press conference announcing it. You can see the shock, the disappointment.
Yeah, I've seen clips of that.
Singapore was basically forced into an independence it didn't want.
So suddenly they're independent, still facing all those huge economic and security problems, and now without the supposed stability of being in the Federation. And then another blow.
Yeah.
The British announced they're pulling their military out.
Exactly. July 1967, the British government officially announced they're withdrawing military forces from Southeast Asia, including Singapore,
Right.
mostly cost-cutting, shifting global priorities. The full withdrawal was set for 1970.
That must have been devastating, losing security and a major source of jobs.
It was a huge setback, yeah. The British military didn't just provide security, they employed a lot of Singaporeans directly. PM Lee tried hard to persuade the British to stay, but no luck.
So Singapore was truly alone, vulnerable security-wise, facing more unemployment. It was, like the transcript says, a do-or-die moment. What were Lee Kuan Yew's immediate moves?
Characteristically swift, decisive, one key early step, forming ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, in June 67.
Right, with neighbors.
Yeah, with Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand. The goal was mutual economic cooperation, collective security support, promoting regional peace.
And economically. The focus shifted heavily to attracting foreign investment, right, to create jobs.
Absolutely. June 68, the government set up the Jurong Town Corporation, the JTC.
JTC.
Its specific job was to develop the Jurong industrial estate in western Singapore into this major manufacturing hub and aggressively pull in foreign companies.
What kind of incentives did they offer to lure these international businesses?
A really attractive package. Tax-free status, significant tax holidays for new industries setting up shop.
But there were conditions.
Oh, yeah. The crucial condition was you had to create a good number of jobs for local Singaporeans. They also brought in very business-friendly labor laws designed to create a stable, relatively low-cost labor environment.
And this strategy worked. It pulled in the foreign money and expertise.
It worked incredibly well. In just 2 years, over 250 foreign companies set up operations there, creating over 32,000 new jobs. These companies came from everywhere: the U.S., Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Malaysia, Australia, Europe.
Diversified investment.
Yeah. And during this time, Singapore also developed major industries, like becoming the world's third largest oil refining center.
That rapid industrialization must have really cut their economic dependence on Malaysia.
It absolutely did. Creating so many jobs within Singapore ended that reliance. By 1970, they'd hit zero unemployment. Zero unemployment and GDP growth rate of 13.9%, which, as the transcript notes, was like 3 times India's growth rate then. Just a stunningly rapid economic turnaround.
But Lee Kuan Yew wasn't satisfied with just labor-intensive manufacturing, was he? He had bigger plans, moving up the value chain.
That's completely right. Things like textiles, wood products, even making mosquito coils. They generated lots of orders, lots of overtime.
Right.
But he saw they had limits for long-term profit and growth. He made a strategic, very forward-thinking decision to shift focus towards tech-intensive, skill-based industries.
What specifically?
Things like machinery manufacturing, electronic components, computer parts, pharmaceuticals, industries that offered much higher potential returns with less reliance on just cheap labor.
And the government put in more incentives to push this transition.
Yep. In 1973, the Economic Development Board, the EDB,
okay.
they announced extended tax exemptions up to 5 years, specifically for investors setting up high-tech industries in Singapore. They also offered incentives for local companies to upgrade their machinery, train staff, adopt newer tech.
Recognizing they needed a skilled workforce for this, they also invested heavily in training.
Absolutely critical. The government set up joint industrial training centers, working closely with the multinational corporations already there. These centers gave invaluable hands-on training, practical experience to rapidly upskill the local workforce, bridging the gap between existing skills and what these new high-tech industries needed.
And this period also saw Singapore become a major international financial center. How did that happen?
Well, the rapid economic growth naturally led to pretty high bank interest rates, which started attracting some foreign money. But there was this big hurdle, a 45% government tax on interest earned from bank deposits. That put off a lot of potential foreign investors.
Right, that's high.
So recognizing this barrier, the government made a bold strategic move. They completely eliminated that 45% tax on bank interest.
Just got rid of it.
Completely. And that single policy change just triggered a massive flood of foreign investment into Singaporean banks, fundamentally transforming the nation into a key global financial hub.
So a series of smart, calculated policy shifts, attracting targeted foreign investment, building a skilled workforce, growing high-value industries. And this continued, right? Even more focus on high-value manufacturing.
Yes, the strategy kept evolving. More focus on high-value goods, greater profits, less labor needed per unit. Starting in 1980, more incentives came in.
Such as?
Higher salary schemes to attract and keep skilled tech workers. Extended tax breaks specifically for manufacturers making high-value products.
And they kept supporting local companies too.
Yep, the government set up the Skills Development Fund. This gave big subsidies to local firms investing in employee training, R&D, computerization, automation,
Right.
all aimed at boosting their capabilities in high-value manufacturing.
And by the early 80s, Singapore was really a world leader in this area.
Absolutely. By 1983, Singapore had become the world's largest exporter of hard disk drives.
Wow, hard disk drives.
Yeah, a really clear, tangible sign of how successful their strategic focus on high-value manufacturing had become.
But their success wasn't just manufacturing. They diversified into other key global sectors too.
Exactly. Singapore achieved major success in tourism, transport and logistics, communications tech, business services, creating this really well-rounded, resilient, dynamic economy.
And throughout this whole transformation, Lee Kuan Yew was pushing big infrastructure projects that boosted Singapore's global image and quality of life.
Absolutely. Under his leadership, you saw the development of so many iconic projects. The
Right.
beautiful Singapore Botanic Gardens, the resort island of Sentosa, the incredibly efficient mass rapid transit system, the MRT,
Yeah, the MRT is famous.
the Singapore Science Park, countless other initiatives. All of them significantly boosted Singapore's international reputation as this modern, well-developed nation.
Which brings us to Singapore today,
Yeah.
a world away from where it started. What's its current global standing?
Today, Singapore is consistently ranked among the world's safest, cleanest, most beautiful countries.
Right.
It has an exceptional and surprisingly affordable healthcare system, an incredibly high literacy rate, 97% backed by a world-class education system, super efficient public transport, one of the world's best airports. Its GDP per capita is among the very highest globally, second in the world, first in Asia.
Wow.
Huge concentration of wealth, like we said. 1 in 6 people are millionaires. Interestingly, it's also known as one of the world's most expensive cities to live in.
A consequence of success, I guess.
Right, a direct reflection of that prosperity. And remarkably, Singapore maintains near zero corruption and extremely low crime rates,
Yeah.
due in large part to its very strict laws and enforcement.
Those laws are definitely famous, aren't they? Things like connecting to someone else's Wi-Fi, littering, even not flushing a public toilet.
Big fines. Yeah, and even jaywalking or selling chewing gum. And the penalties for drug offenses are notoriously severe.
That strict legal framework is really a key part of maintaining order and safety, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's a core element of maintaining social order, public safety, the country's famous cleanliness, and it's definitely been a big factor in Singapore's reputation for stability and security.
It's fascinating how so many other countries have tried to copy Singapore's success, but like our source says, they often fall way short. What are the fundamental things, maybe the less obvious ones, that made Singapore's transformation so unique and hard to replicate?
Well, the transcript really nails it, I think. National unity, that strong shared identity, and that deeply ingrained culture of zero tolerance for corruption.
Those two pillars.
Those are the two fundamental pillars. Without those firmly in place, any other policies, however good, are just much less likely to work long-term.
And at the heart of it all was Lee Kuan Yew's unwavering long-term vision, right? That willingness to put the nation's long-term survival and prosperity above short-term politics.
His relentless focus on the long-term health of Singapore, his pragmatic, adaptable approach to policy, his absolute commitment to building a strong, secure, prosperous nation. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
He's still held in immense respect, admiration for his absolutely pivotal role in Singapore's extraordinary, almost unbelievable transformation.
So really, to wrap it up, Singapore's incredible journey from this resource-poor, poverty-stricken island to a wealthy global powerhouse. It's just this powerful testament to strategic leadership, right?
Visionary leadership.
An unwavering focus on building real national unity among diverse people, a relentless, adaptable drive for economic development, and that uncompromising stance against corruption.
Absolutely.
A story full of surprises, like being basically forced into independence.
Right, an independence they didn't even initially want.
Yeah. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What fundamental, often really difficult shifts in mindset and policy are truly needed to achieve that kind of transformative change. Whether you're talking about a nation facing huge challenges.
Or even just our own individual efforts, maybe.
Exactly. That's a really powerful thought. Considering Singapore's truly unique, almost improbable path, What are the most transferable lessons? What can other nations or even individuals aiming for radical improvement actually take away and apply? It definitely gives you a lot to chew on.
It certainly does. And it really encourages you to dig deeper, doesn't it, into the specifics, the mindset behind this truly remarkable story.